This is kind of a interesting video to make. It's maybe put it here. All right. It's a bit less. Well, yeah. So I did EMDR yesterday. I guess the background is I shared my YouTube channel on my personal Facebook page, which is kind of risky because there are family people there. The main thing is that now people can go onto the YouTube videos and see what's going on, and obviously my videos aren't exactly charitable to my parents. So partially this is like, well, if you're part of my family and you're wondering what the fuck happened, this video is a good explanation. What I'm trying to do is put my parents into context. I'm trying to reinforce they're not innately bad people. They're very hurt people. And in some ways it's not, in many ways it's not their fault. In some ways they kind of perpetuated it on themselves. Obviously they don't deserve it. So I'll start with my dad, because I have a good relationship with my dad now, actually, neutral to good. See, when I was younger, he was a very angry man, which you could probably tell from my videos. And he's not anymore, which is amazing. And what I've learned about him is really just through reflecting on myself, because in many ways I've become like my dad, or I had these same issues, just anger, feeling indebted to the world, feeling like I could never just kind of get my own space. And I think that's what was happening with him. For background, this is generational trauma. So his dad was also abusive. His mom was too. And then he had the added stress of growing up in a developing country. And I don't think he had that much money when he was growing up. So in some ways, because he's a really smart guy, his family almost viewed him as a way to get a lot more money. And that's just the reality for many immigrants. They come to these developed countries and they send money back. And there's nothing wrong with that, honestly. Like, it's just really randomness that the United States, Europe, Australia has a lot more money than some of these developing countries, and that doesn't make it right. So he comes to the States. Immigration is a traumatizing process because you're leaving everything you know behind, all of your support system and everything, going to an entirely new place. People don't look like you. There's racism in this country, and he's also has the added pressure of doing his PhD and sending money back to India. So, a very hard process. The poor guy never got a chance to really just be himself. He's kind of the definition of a parentified child in some ways, like day one, taking care of his family. And then, just never got to be a kid. So I really think his whole priority when I was growing up is just making sure the family kept going. And unfortunately, he also had his trauma. So what that means is that he will react to things in kind of an explosive manner at times. And it's a cycle, because you react badly, you feel shame, and that shame makes you bottle stuff up more and explodes even more the next time. And I was a victim of that. So this is not to excuse anything that he did. What he did was wrong. But this is mostly me saying, like, I don't hate him. He's actually a very good person now. I met with him last week for the first time in almost 3 years, and he was just a much happier, kinder person. That being said, he's obviously on his best behavior because he knows that I could just walk up at any moment. But I think I could tell something deeply had changed, and I've spoken to my sister too, and she's kind of reflected that he's trying. He's reading books on triggers. He attended couples counseling with my mom. He's been doing meditation, trying to do that introspection. I could obviously tell him oh, you should go see a trauma trained therapist, which I think he should. That's his life. So I don't hate the man. I actually really appreciate him. I really respect him for, everybody gets dealt a hand of cards at the beginning of their life, and some are just really shitty. He got dealt a worse hand than I did. And he's really played it the best he could. He made a lot of mistakes for sure, but at the same time, if you're watching this you have a lot to be proud of too. You have to, you have to take the good with the bad with the good. So yeah, that's my dad. My mom is a much more complicated case, because I don't speak to her. I think arguably she did more damage to me than he did. Yeah, I don't actually know as much about her childhood. She was an immigrant, and immigration is a traumatizing process, as I said. She's also a woman in kind of a male-dominated culture, so it's not the best thing. Women aren't exactly treated the best in India, and my dad he was actually very good about supporting my mom on that front. I think that's always been a priority of his, but even then, it's like, there's only so much you can only outrun your culture so much, right? So I think my mom is quite narcissistic, and like, what does that mean? That means that she has a hard time looking outside of herself and her own emotions. And the hard part is that I was, abused pretty heavily because of that. And I held on to so much anger for so much time, and I still am a pretty angry person at times, especially about her. But I think the main thing I feel for her is sadness, because she was once a little girl and kind of got lost. That little girl got lost through a lot of trauma, which I don't really know the details of. From what little I do know, I was in India one time, and I think my aunt was telling my mom that, like, oh yeah, my mom was pretty neglected. And from what I remember, my mom would tell me stories of how her mom and dad would go out to work, and she would have to look up to her older sister almost as a parental figure. And then my mom's brother also doesn't talk to the family. So my mom does make it seem like it was a very happy family. And she would say things like, oh yeah, my parents would hit me and I was terrified of them, but I knew at the end of the day they loved me. And I think that's what she internalized for me. Like, she could terrorize me as a kid, but she loves me, and that's why she does it, and therefore it's not wrong. And it's hard, because I think the definition of love there is fundamentally the issue. Because love does not mean possessiveness through insecurity. So what I'm getting at is, like, I think she was a very neglected kid, and as a result never really got to develop her own sense of self. It was very terrorized, a terrified person too, a very anxious person. And because of that, it's so hard for her to see outside of her fear and anxiety, to see how do my actions affect the other person. And obviously saying, oh, I do these things because I love you, it's a very easy way to not have to reflect on yourself. Because you can say, oh no, I love him, therefore I'm not doing anything wrong, It's really sad. I don't speak to her. She's tried the Hoover. Gave me pretty poorly done apologies, and my trust is it's very, very shattered at this time, and I don't really put much emphasis on rebuilding it with her, because I want to live my life. But at the same time, I also don't think she's a terrible person. I think she didn't really do the best job of being a mother. And it's sad, because in some ways that's all the identity that she had while I was growing up, and she would frequently speak like that. But at the end of the day, it is still like this little girl who was traumatized. And unfortunately, my mother is a little girl in a 51-year-old woman's body. That's kind of how I see it with my parents. My dad has grown up a little bit, He's definitely better. I can have a good conversation with him. He's very supportive, and I do love him. He's a good person. Now, it's hard. It's hard with the judgment Indian parents get, and Asian parents too, in the States, because there is the stereotype that, like, they're kind of crazy, very academics driven and whatnot. And to some extent that stereotype is true, but it's not the fairest stereotype, because I don't think many Americans understand that difficulty of growing up in a developing country and needing the money, because the pressures back in India are so much different. When you see poverty all around you, you see people like without clothes in the streets, like that's, you do see that stuff. And I'm not saying all of India is like that either, but it does inform your worldview very differently. And it informs my worldview very differently too. I do feel the sense of like need to help the world, because I grew up seeing that too, not as much as my parents. And you know, America, it's been more developed, has more access to therapy and whatnot. The culture is a little bit more progressive. You know, there could be a lot better. This culture for sure has a lot of issues, but you know, my parents really did the best that they could with the hand of cards that they were dealt as children. And I say as children because they had many opportunities to change while I was growing up, which were not taken. But you know, you can't just damn somebody. I'm not God. I can't just say that they're irredeemable, that they've, you know, judgment should be rained upon them. That's not my place. So the main purpose of this video is to inject some nuance into how I view my parents. And you know, if you're going through recovery and you're in the process, you're just starting, don't worry about it. Like just worry about yourself, you know? You don't need to think about, oh, poor them, because that's what I did for so much time. And honestly, it slowed me down. Sometimes, you know, your ego will start feeding you these stories of like, oh, poor them, if only they did X, Y, and Z, I could just tell them and then they'd heal. And then I'd finally have my parents. It's not how it works, unfortunately. Many of the people with like the fixer type traumatization, I think, go towards that point of view. But you know, maybe if you're farther along or want some understanding of what, I guess, a little bit more extreme of an Indian family can be like, maybe this video will help. In any case, good luck with your healing. Take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.